So let's start at the beginning. We're all used to a conventional meeting, going to a hall, listening to a speaker, or having a discussion about something. Everything's in the venue. There isn't anything complicated going on. There's no need for software. There's no need for lots of computing. There's no need for all the sorts of attendant technology that comes with trying to do a hybrid meeting. We do need good audio. There's got to be a good microphone system. There's got to be a good PA system. We have that in this room here. There's some fairly sophisticated gear hiding in the background. This is in the BCS offices in Swindon. We've got a need for some kind of computer these days, usually connected to a projector, which is then controlled by some kind of handheld device such as this. And we still need somebody to set up the audio equipment and assist the speaker if needed. And that's a conventional meeting. That's relatively straightforward. The important thing that's hiding behind this is that the equipment that's in use doesn't change very much over time. Unlike computer-based technology, where you're constantly getting updates of software, firmware, and everything else, which makes it a lot more difficult to manage as we start adding more equipment. So that's a conventional meeting. We also, during the pandemic era, have got used to online meetings for individuals. And this has become a great way for a lot of people to work. And this is pretty straightforward. People have got used to being at home on an internet connection. We've all seen all those ridiculous bits of video of things going on in the background, children wandering past, things going horribly wrong, and so on and so on and so on. And there's no need for sophisticated audio or video equipment in a venue. It's generally better if you're going to talk to have a separate microphone and a webcam as the speaker, so you get a somewhat better result. You're reliant on the audio and video, and sometimes you'll find that broadband from home isn't necessarily as good as you'd like, but on the whole, it's been pretty successful for most people. What we now have is online meetings. So how do they work? So we've got client PCs that connect to some kind of server. We've got the roles that we would normally have. We've got the person hosting and chairing the meeting, we've got the person to talk, and we've got attendees. Hiding in the background of some of the online stuff is quite a lot of audio processing, trying to minimize echo and delay and feedback, things like that. And they're multi-platform. People might be using a Windows-based laptop, people might be using an Apple Mac, people might be using some variety of cell phone. It could be an iPhone, could be an Android phone, all sorts of things. You'll be able to record what's going on. And there's a whole range of different types of software that you can use from different vendors. GoToMeeting was really popular for a while. WebEx has been really popular for a while. Zoom has become popular during the pandemic era. There's Microsoft Teams, there's Google Meet. There's all sorts of things out there that you can use for online collaboration and meetings. And some of them are subtly designed for one thing, not another. But in general, they all give similar capability. A lot of them have free versions, which are generally limited in some way. And there are various license options that you can use it in more corporate environments. They all broadly work in a similar way, where we've got some kind of meeting server out there in the internet. We've got attendees who are connected to the meeting server, and we've got the speaker and the host, the organizers, with their machines connected through as well. So these people are where the licenses sit, these are the people hosting it, these are the people setting the meeting up, letting people in, things like that. And then you have screen sharing, video sharing, and audio sharing, people can collaborate. So it needs good audio and video quality. Now it's interesting here, audio is essential, video is useful, it's not necessary. If you've got insufficient bandwidth and the voice quality is dropping, sometimes chopping off the video will actually help, because you'll allow more of the bandwidth in the network to carry the audio signal. And another thing is, it needs a good bi-directional network communication. In general, most people at home have got broadband, which is designed primarily for information coming from the internet to them. It's asymmetric, and it's not really designed in the first place for sending a lot of data out back to the internet. That's key here when we're doing online meetings, because we need good bi-directional communication in order that the audio and the video streams can successfully go both ways without undue delays and interference. And then we have to authenticate in order to be, secure, know who we are, and also all the data flows tend to be encrypted. And that comes with the need for a reasonably powerful computer to be able to handle the workload of running things like decryption. So that's some idea of what's happening briefly from a technology point of view, and a background as to why hybrid meetings might be of interest. So, hybrid meetings combine the traditional in-venue meeting with online participation. It's not the same as an online meeting for individuals that we're used to. It's subtly different because of the scale. We need more sophisticated equipment and more people. We've got a room with people in. There are some great advantages for it as well, because everybody can be in combination of whether they're in the venue or whether they're attending remotely. And everybody can participate and ask questions, everybody can be heard, everybody can see each other, hopefully. And that enables quite a lot more activity. And so, as a general principle, there's a huge need for much more social interaction than we used to do, particularly with after things like the pandemic. This is a great way of helping with that. Everybody just being at home isn't necessarily hugely successful. People coming to a real venue and interacting with other real people in person is actually a really good thing. And so it's been a big relief I've seen in some of the voluntary organisations, third-party organisations, third sector organisations, things like U3A, where people have been desperate to get out and meet each other again. But equally, some people may be unwilling to travel or unable to travel for a whole range of reasons. So the ability to do a hybrid approach where you've got both in-venue meeting and external attendees, or remote attendees, can really greatly increase the attendance. It's a good thing to be doing. The other thing about it is it gives you a much wider range of possible speakers. You don't have to have the speaker come to the venue. Nice if they do, but you don't have to do that anymore. I've been giving talks in America from my back bedroom at home for 20 plus years professionally. That kind of technology is now achievable with more or less consumer electronic type equipment, rather than having to have a lot of very sophisticated equipment. So there's some big advantages to using the hybrid approach. But it gets really complicated, because you've now got to introduce software, you've got to introduce extra hardware, and there are some twists and turns to this that make it surprisingly difficult. The biggest twist and turn is around the audio world. And if you're starting to do it on a sophisticated, big venue scale, it's not necessarily going to be terribly cheap. Quality does cost. Doing things a little better tends to cost more. And the big difference between the kinds of stuff that people have been doing with corporate video conferencing, those things we're doing now, and the kind of low budget setup you might just use at home on your own, is we need something a bit better for doing the hybrid, but we don't want to go as far as things like the corporate video conferencing experience, because that's in many cases too much money for the venues that are available to you. So speakers share audio, video, and screen content in just the same way as normal. In the venue, we need screen projection. We also, in a big venue, need audio amplification. So the speaker will typically be wearing a wireless microphone. It's got that sound that we picked up. It's got to be played out through speakers in the venue. People can hear. The online world needs not only that, it also needs the screen sharing. It needs, so that means we need audio feeds into the PCs. We need video camera input. We need connectivity to the internet. We need software. We need a whole load more different pieces, all of which have got to work. So we're doing both worlds at one go, which is quite complex. So we were thinking about this earlier. We came to the conclusion there are some key roles and responsibilities here. So in the same way as with a normal meeting, you have a chairperson. That role still exists. They largely run the meeting, they handle the questions. They'll pass the microphone around, they'll do things like that. Or in a really big thing, you might have people with multiple microphones running around, big APM, for example. Sorry, annual general meetings. I don't know, so take something like, oh, I don't know, the National Trust. They want to, if they have, when they hold their AGM, they'll have a big venue. They might have 1,000 people turn up, and people want to ask questions. So what you do is have runners positioned around the auditorium with wireless microphones. When somebody wants to ask a question, they stick their hand up. Somebody runs over them with a wireless microphone. The person running the audio feeds enables that microphone. They can then ask their question. Question comes, the sound comes out through the loudspeaker so that you can hear it, and so on and so on. So, yeah, you've been to those kinds of big meetings. Oh, you're not, okay. Oh. Yeah, I've been to a few. So these kinds of technologies are really useful to be able to make things like that work. So the role of the chair still exists. We also have the role of the host. So the host is kind of the master of ceremonies from a technical viewpoint. So they're running the computer equipment. They're keeping an eye on things like chat in the background. They're keeping an eye on the audio. They are partly the tech. It's not just being a technician. There's quite a lot more to it. The speaker just shows up and talk, right? And hands questions. The speaker's job's easy. It's all the other stuff. Everybody has to interact and be prepared. So preparing and testing in advance is key. We actually did a lot of work here earlier on. This is actually quite interesting. So the BCS office in Swindon, doing a talk like this from Swindon doesn't have, doesn't happen terribly often. Most of the BCS talks like this are done out of London. So there's a different setup here. So we came here earlier and experimented with a few ways to make sure that everything would do what we were expecting it to do. So preparation and briefing is really important. Equipment setup and testing, particularly if you're turning up with a laptop to give a talk, as the speaker, you kind of have an obligation to get there early, meet up with the people, make sure that everything plugs together correctly, make sure that, test everything. So have a mini test meeting in advance, all those sorts of things. To try and make sure that you understand how it all hangs together. Because things can go wrong. Sometimes things do go wrong. And sometimes you need to understand enough about it that you can do something about it on the fly and resolve the problem fairly quickly without chopping off the remote attendees or badly disrupting the flow of the discussion. So, yeah, a well-run hybrid meeting. I gave a talk in Chepstow not that long back, and that was really well done. Yeah, there were really good people doing all the different key roles. The person running all the technology, there was two of them actually, they did a great job. The person hosting the meeting did a great job. Cheering, all those sorts of things were really slick. And there were really smooth transitions between people fielding the questions and running the technology and the person chairing the meeting and interrupting the speaker and asking good questions. And that all came down to good preparation, good briefing, what they expected the speaker to be able to do. Good equipment and good network connectivity. And because they had several people there who all understood it, they were also able to cope fairly well with unexpected problems should the needs arise. So that's kind of what a well-run hybrid meeting can look like. It's not different. It's not very different to running a normal meeting. It's just you've got this added complication of all this technology stuff on the side, really. Questions is probably the key thing. From being given quite a few talks, this is one of the key things, certainly for me, is that the chairperson's handling the questions. They interrupt the speaker by voice. It works really well. The host, who's the person running the technology, keeps an eye on the chat rooms and stuff like that. The chairperson might also be sat down at a laptop as well while the talk is happening, so they can keep an eye on things too. And if there's a question coming in on the online world, they interrupt, they read it, they might interrupt the speaker by voice, they'll read the question so that everybody can hear it, and it's dealt with really well. And the other thing that usually has to happen is that the person running the technology, the host, will typically have to mute or unmute the attendee. And they've also got to keep an eye on things there, because if anybody unmutes by accident, they need to be on the ball and shutting it down. Otherwise, that will get fed in the whole meeting if you're lucky. So questions is one of the key tests. So that's where really good cooperation between the people involved is important. So we describe this really, but it helps if the chairperson understands enough about the technology that they can run some of it if they have to. It's really useful. The host, or technical director as you might call them, is key. They've really got to understand all this stuff, keep an eye on everything. They're responsible largely for the technical aspects, but it's not just a technical job. If you've got audio mixers involved because of the need for amplification of things, they're keeping an eye on that. They'll start and host the meeting, they'll manage the audio video, all of those things need doing. And sometimes in bigger meetings, certainly in co-hosting is really useful. One of the big meetings I went to recently in London last week, they actually had a professional services company in to do all of this. And they had multiple cameras, they had all sorts of sophisticated gear. They did a really slick job. Very impressive. And it was all really, really good. So the speakers, doing the talk, great. They've got their own PC that they're using for screen sharing, which is what's happening here today. So I've got my laptop hooked up to the projection system here through the HDMI. That's how the slides are being visible. I've joined the Zoom meeting from my laptop, and I'm screen sharing from my laptop. Today is subtly different from how I would normally set things up, in that the audio is actually running through my laptop, not the host laptop. There's a complex reason for that, but it's basically incompatible because it's a fairly old Apple MacBook, and so we've just recabled things slightly, so it's running through my laptop rather than the host laptop. It doesn't really make any difference. I'm still sharing the audio. The audio system here is quite sophisticated. It's got built-in echo cancelling and a whole lot of other cleverness. That's really good. I'm using a handheld slide controller, which has got this rather nice software-based highlighter and pointer capability. And that's really useful because it's done through screen sharing, and therefore people can see this remotely, not just in the venue. And a bigger event, please.
For me, most of the hybrid meetings I've attended, biggest challenge is playing a video.
Is it?
Yeah. So how you play a video in your room, and sometimes, especially in Teams, the audio doesn't get picked up.
Right.
That's a big problem.
Okay. So in a piece of software like Zoom, one of the things that will happen is if you're playing an audio clip or a video clip, there's usually a tick box that says share my audio.
And there is on in Teams. Teams has
And
that
there
as
will
well.
be-
But
there
it's
will
not.
be-
It's not in an obvious place. You really have to look around the screen, click the little box, and then it'll connect the computer audio into the.
Yeah. So I was in a meeting last week Thursday, same thing, the hybrid meeting. Someone had prepared a video. When they joined with the computer sound, so the Teams will tell you you want to join with the computer sound, or you want to join just with no audio. And you join the computer sound, but when you play the video, the sound still functions.
Yeah, there are settings in most of the online meeting software. There are settings that make that sound sharing possible. And it can, if you're using multiple laptops, that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge as well. You've got to remember to share the sound. So can I come on to some diagrams shortly that'll maybe go over some of this in a little more detail? But yeah, I've seen that happen. And usually as a speaker, you'd wear some kind of lapel microphone, and ideally you've got some kind of face tracking webcam. I'm actually using one of those today. And that hopefully is doing a reasonable job of showing what's going on. If the speaker's remote, i.e. not in the venue, then you're going to want a microphone with really good quality. That might be a desktop one, sort of podcast type of microphone, things like that. There are various makes out there. Personally, I quite like a make called Rode or over the line through DE. They make some nice stuff, but so do Shure, so do Sennheiser, lots of makes. You want a half decent webcam, ideally with some kind of face tracking and zooming. I happen to use this Jabra thing, works pretty well for me. You'll want some kind of highlighter and pointer capability, which is why I use this handheld controller, which I quite like. If the speaker is remote, it is still sensible to have a separate laptop in the venue for the screen sharing PC that is connected to the projection system and the audio is using, or it's connected to the audio system in the venue. So the equipment in the venue is kind of the same as if the speaker were there, but they're not. They're just somewhere else. Let's have a quick look at some of the technology behind all this. So one of the biggies is all the data networking side of the world. This is the connectivity to the outside world from the venue, and it's the connectivity from the attendees to the online meeting. So there are some technical terms that get used. There's bandwidth, which is basically the maximum achievable data rate. Remember that it's asymmetric in most cases, particularly if you're going from home. ADSL stand here, asynchronous, subscriber. Latency matters. Now, latency is different to bandwidth. Latency is the inherent delays in communication. So if you're communicating with somebody who's halfway around the globe, there'll be a sizable delay before you hear from them. A much bigger problem is what technically is called jitter, where if somebody's working over a poor connection, the delay could be very variable. So it could be quite quick, it could be really slow. And that's very frustrating to deal with from an audio and a video point of view. And there's a subtle interrelationship, it's called queuing theory, there's quite a lot of maths behind it, that if the bandwidth is less, you tend to suffer more from jitter. The biggest problem, which triggers all this, is something called contention, which is something else trying to use the data link at the same time. And so the combination of contention, not enough bandwidth, not great latency tends to give you bad jitter, and that tends to give you bad audio and video quality. And under those circumstances, it's usually worth sacrificing the video and turning that off, because then you'll get better, usually you'll end up with better audio quality, and you can carry on with an online meeting with audio, but carrying on without video is often an acceptable problem. You've also got a device called a router, which is the connection from within the venue out to the internet. It's just worth knowing it exists. Most people connect to the router in two ways. There's either a wired connection, which is, depending on the venue, sometimes used. Most commonly, it's Wi-Fi. One of the things to remember with Wi-Fi, particularly in a big venue, is that it's a shared communications medium. So if I, as the speaker, am using Wi-Fi and Jeff is using Wi-Fi from his laptop as the host, and people in the room are all using cell phones and they're all connected to the internet as well, as is my cell phone, which is lying on the desk over there. If you've got a lot of devices in the room and people are, poking around at things and there's all sorts of stuff going on, you've automatically created an environment where contention is a significant possibility. So in a big venue, what's a nice thing to do if you can is at least give the speaker and the host either an entirely different Wi-Fi network off a different transmitter that nobody else is using to talk to, or use one.
So it's contention there is similar to traffic on the network.
Yeah, lots of traffic on the network. The traffic contends with each other, and that interferes with things. Yeah, so the more traffic there is, the more contention there is. And so in a shared and Wi-Fi is shared bandwidth. Wired isn't generally. And then you've got, and that's within the venue, and then outside the venue, you've only got a finite communications path, and everything's got to go down through them. Everything's got to make its way in and out of that. So understanding that is key, because that helps you think about where some of the interference might be coming, the contention might be coming from. So that's just a diagrammatic way of expressing the same thing. In venue, we've got the speaker, we've got the host of the attendees, we've got the video equipment, the audio equipment, and then we've got people connecting remotely. We've got the remote speaker. It's basically the same thing, except the speaker's somewhere else. That's it. There are some requirements that we need to remember. So, the attendees need to see the shared slides, both within the venue and online. And everybody needs to hear the speaker. And some of them might like to watch the speaker as well, hence the webcam. The speaker needs to hear the questions. It'd be really nice sometimes to be able to see the speakers. That's when you start getting into bidirectional video with an actual monitor screen of the speaker and all sorts of sophisticated stuff like that. It's possible. Good audio quality really matters. So here at the BCS offices, we've got echo cancelling microphones and all sorts of sophisticated stuff, which is really quite nice to be able to use it. Within most venues, you don't have that. So you'll probably, show earlier, you're probably using an audio mix from various other things to control that and to design how everything's laid out very carefully. And it's also a good idea, if you can, to try and minimize the speaker's workload, especially having things like chat sessions, people asking questions from there. And within the venue, we've got, projection equipment, display screens, all sorts of things here. And crucially, it's got to be kept working and kept up to date and checked and tested and made sure that it works and all the interfaces are correct. And that you've got the right adapters, depending on what laptops people have brought. All sorts of things like that need to be in place. So that's a diagrammatic representation of the same thing. There's the speaker's PC, the projection system, there's PC with the other two pieces. Let's look at the audio side of the world a little. This is generally the hardest thing. Really sophisticated audio systems, big sophisticated mixing desks. It's a pretty specialized profession. This is why, big concert venues, things like that, effort into this. Even churches over the pandemic era put huge amounts of effort into sophisticated audio to make sure that everything comes out. So the speakers generally able to move around. They're generally using a wireless bell microphone. That means a radio transmitter belt pack to a receiver, which also means you need to think about whether you need an Ofcom license in this country. So you want to make sure you're using a frequency band, ideally that doesn't. You can look those up from the Ofcom website. There's all the radio spectrum stuff there and various licenses and purposes you're using it for, to look at the licenses. The in-venue attendees will usually be using a handheld microphone passed around by the chair. And the chair will generally use the same handheld microphone. Here, the venue is quite small. It's got a very sophisticated microphone array. We don't need that because the sound is being picked up. And in bigger venues, you're typically connected to what's called a PA system, public address system. And you'll often have a hearing aid induction booth as well. That's particularly useful for a lot of third sector organisations. Venues. And this tends to be venue facilities, not something you'll take in with you. But somehow you've also got to get the audio in the venue into the online meeting software. So you've somehow got to connect it to the laptop or the PC that you're using to control the sound as an input device. And you need the audio output from the online meeting to go to the PA system in the venue so that people in the venue can hear people asking questions remotely. Audio signals, mostly being analog, not digital, also require protection from interference. Long distances. So you tend to use balance signals and all sorts of fancy cables connected. And something else about microphones is they tend to be very short range and very directional, because otherwise they run the risk of picking up sound from PA systems. So, big bands, big concerts, things like that, recording technology has done a really good job over the last nearly 100 years, sorting out how to do this kind of stuff pretty well and make sure that you don't get echoes and delays and feedback and all sorts of things.
So in a small venue, then how do you avoid interference?
By just careful placing of microphones and speakers, mostly.
So what you want the wireless mic to be behind the speakers or the speakers?
Sorry?
You want this, so you put wireless mics, you put it behind the speakers so there's no interference or
Well, if I'm using a wireless lapel microphone, this person giving the talk, usually the microphone is incredibly short range. It's a bit like being a singer on a stage. They'll use a wireless headset microphone, and it's only picking sound up from within, less than 30 centimeters. It's a really short range sensitive microphone, and it's rejecting a lot of the incoming sound. You then also have built-in echo cancellation software these days, and sometimes you might have phase shifting software. There's all sorts of clever stuff going on. But the key thing is laying things out, using the right kinds of equipment to minimize the risk of picking up the wrong kinds of sound.
The reason I asked is I was in a venue once where they had the mics on the ceiling mics to pick up the sound in the room, and they had to speak over the laptop mic, and they kept on having interference.
Yeah, they would do. Yeah, so what we're doing here is the audio on the audio here is actually a very sophisticated microphone array with built-in echo cancellation. And that's why we're not getting any trouble in this venue. If we were in an entirely different venue, we'd be using lapel microphones, which are short range. We'd be using handheld microphones. The host who's running the thing would have a small mixer in front of them. They'd be controlling the gain. They'd be shutting down the microphones that aren't in use. It's just like running the sound at a big concert.
There's nowhere around it, you just have to get a mixer to control it.
Ideally, yeah, it's the only real way to do it. The good news is that these days you can get really small mixers for doing this kind of thing for not terribly much money. Well under a couple of £100 will buy you a USB connected mixer with a couple of channels and a connection to the laptop. And that can actually do pretty much all you need in a small venue. The other thing is not too many stages of conversion. So sounds analog. Really, you only want to go through one stage of conversion. If you're going, into a mixer, out again is an analog, back into a laptop, it goes to another digital. You can get too many things that can just degrade the sound. So the mixer is generally the key in most venues. It isn't here because this is a bigger venue in terms of the technology they've got, and they've spent a lot of money on very sophisticated echo cancelling microphone systems. Most venues can't afford to do that these days. So a lot of venues are reliant on having small scale things like small mixers. Then we feed the combined stream into the online meeting software, there's a thing called mixed minus going on here, because what we don't want is the output from the online meeting being fed back into the online meeting. Yeah, then we're really going to be in trouble. Then we have huge amounts of interference, feedback. And then we also need to take the combined output of everything that's happening in the room and from the online and feed that into the PA system without speaking to the bigger thing. But you can now get small scale mixers. So this typically gives you an idea for the signal path. So you've got a couple of microphones, the speaker's lapel microphone there, the handheld microphone being passed around there. The audio mixer, you've got somebody controlling the gain to turn the microphones up and down. And then you've got all the other bits and pieces that are going on. That's fed into the PC audio in as a digital signal, the USB connection. You've got USB coming out into the audio mixer. And then you've got the feed off to the PA system. And then hopefully in the venue, you've got an induction loop for people with units.
What are the green lines and red lines?
So the red lines are the feeds that are going that way. So the microphone has got to go out to the PA system. The sound coming out of the online meeting has got to go into the PA system. However, the green lines are the microphone feeds going into the online meeting, but not, crucially, the PC audio out going back in. So the mixer right there is splitting the signal. So half the signal goes to the PA system, and some of it, the mixed minus part, is taken off to the PC audio input, then feed into the online meeting.
Colin, some people online are having problems making out what questions are. Can you repeat them before you answer?
Yeah, sure, I will. Yeah, I'll try and do that. Thank you. So an audio mixer with USB capability gives you a couple of analog digital audio devices at the USB connection. The mixer does the signal conversion. It's fed into the online meeting. And so that's really just a written way of describing what we've just seen on the diagram. There's a picture of a typical small mixer. It happens to be a Yamaha one. There are several makes available. And that shows you what it might physically look like. So you've got microphone signals coming in, you've got a USB connection at the top, you've got signals in blue coming out, and then you've got the controls pointed out in red as to where you would change things like the signal levels to make sure that the sound quality is acceptable. So that's an example. It's USB powered, the PC sees it as two devices. And really, functionally, microphones are connected to the two channels. They've got individual control of the gain, the level of amplification you get there. And then the eventual results, as we saw in the diagram there, go back to the PA system to come out of the speakers. The video side of the world is, well, let's finish up. There's one other thing to say about the audio side of the world. It's very venue dependent. You know, some venues will provide audio equipment, some won't. In general, it's safe to assume that a venue probably has a PA system, and that's about it. And so my general opinion is that you're better off probably having your own mixer and your own laptop, because a lot of organizations will hire venues, and so you are somewhat at the whim of what the venue's got to provide. Some venues have got all this stuff set up and it's great. Some venues have got all this stuff, like maybe a church hall, but they're scared of anybody touching it because they don't want anything to stop working. Some venues are very happy to give you places where you can connect other equipment. Some people will go as far as taking their own portable PA system. it really does depend on the venue as to just how far you need to go. So what you need to do. Video is actually easier, really. There's two kinds of video. There's webcam video, which is moving images of people and things. And then there's the video output from the laptop for screen projection for slides, things like that. So this is mostly around the webcam stuff. So most laptop webcams don't do a great job. Separate webcam that's got some kind of capability for pan tilt, zoom, ideally face tracking, a bit like this little thing, will generally give a better image. And you use most digital cameras, even big sophisticated Canon cameras and Nikon cameras. You can actually use those as an incredibly expensive webcam if you want to. You can have a massive camera at the back of the room with a huge lens on it and do all sorts of good stuff with those. That's out of reach of most organisations operating on a limited budget. You can also have multiple camera feeds. You can actually have multiple HDMI feeds. And in the same way that with audio, you can use an audio mixer, you can actually get video switcher boxes. There's a little thing called an A10 Mini, well-known company in the video world called Blackmagic. And again, for a couple hundred, 200-300 quid, I think, you can get a little box that selects which camera you're watching and feeds the output into a laptop as over a webcam over a USB link. And things like that, if you're doing more sophisticated things where you want multiple cameras, is quite a neat way of doing it. But that's not necessary unless you feel the urge to do it. It's not as necessary as good quality audio. Then you've got the video projection off a laptop. So the computer's connected to projection system, usually with HDMI, which is what's happening here. You might need a portable projector and a screen if the venue's got limited facilities. Certainly, I've given some talks for various organisations where I ended up taking a laptop, projector and screen along as well in order to be able to do that. And obviously, the bigger the venue, the heftier the projection system needs to be. A lot of venues do now, which is what's happening here in this facility in Swindon, is you actually got multiple screens on the wall rather than one big projection screen. And there's exactly the same kind of diagram again, showing webcams going in possibly through a video switcher, or that might just be selecting the input you want in the software and feeding it into the online meeting. And you'll want to make sure you set all this sort of webcam stuff up in advance, tested it from the online meeting software settings first. There's also a piece of software out there called Open Broadcaster software, which is free, which is attractive, and it's a good piece of software. And it can let you have multiple webcams connected to a computer. This way you wouldn't need a video switcher. You just feed the inputs into the Open Broadcaster software. Sometimes I'll use that anyway, because it gives you the ability to crop and zoom the image from a normal webcam. So just run Open Broadcaster software, pull the image into it, crop and zoom it to the size and shape you want, and then send it to what's called the virtual camera, and then connect the online meeting software to the virtual camera, and then you've got different things going on. It requires a bit of knowledge about the technology. It's not hugely complex, but it's something else to think about while you're running a meeting. So you may or may not choose to go that far. Personally, it depends on the level of sophistication. If you've got a reasonably sophisticated webcam, I actually think that's probably enough for most people. Also, don't forget that the PC you're using has got quite a lot of workloads going on. You're running the online meeting software, you've got all the data transmission, including encryption stuff, and you've got a lot of video processing going on, using backgrounds, you've got a lot of audio processing going on for layers and echoes, as well as also. And beware of other things going on the computer. So you might want to think about disabling automatic updates during the working day, things like that. Certainly while you're computers. So What might be an ideal kind of setup? Well, ideally, you've got this, enormously high speed, high throughput, low latency internet connection without much contention. That would be fantastic. We've got a really sophisticated in-venue PA system with hearing aid induction loop and all sorts of things. You have to use the console hall. That would be really nice. We've got a really good wireless microphone set up for the speaker and for the other people involved. Would be great. Handheld microphone. Got somebody driving an audio mixer, doing a really good job on all the sound stuff. Got somebody doing a really good job on all the video stuff. That would be terrific. Understand what you've got in the venue. What do you need to take? What do you not need to do? What kind of network connection have they got? This is a big problem with hired venues. You really don't, hiring a church hall or something, you really don't know what else is happening in the background. People in other rooms, other people hiring a different room in the same large venue, and you're all sharing the same internet connection. It's very hard to know what's going on. And that can bring problems with it if they start burning up bandwidth, doing other things. And that will affect your experience or the experience of the people attending online. Think about the kinds of microphones you're using, think about how things connect up. Get there in advance, check out the audio levels, check out the venue, make sure that the PA system sounds good. All of this is basically preparation. You might have, very minimalist setup, literally just an internet connection, some small PA system, possibly a wireless handheld microphone would be nice. Projector. Ideally for the speaker, a wireless lapel microphone. They don't have to have one. They can use the same handheld microphone, one wireless microphone, or even a wired one, or lectern if you use. Personally, I think these handheld slide controllers are really useful, especially with the pointed highlighter capability, but again, it's not essential. Big thing is, good and consistent latency and bandwidth on the network connection. And if it does go badly, try disabling the video. That might just keep things going. And it helps if you've got some idea of what level of quality is acceptable to you. As I keep saying, be aware of contention. There's other things going on. So it's kind of useful, I think, sort of think of things like that as some kind of background noise and do what you can to shut them out. So here are some thoughts that might be useful. So, ideally you've got about 3 PCs in operation. You've got the host, who's the person running the meeting technically. You've got the speaker, who's hopefully brought their own laptop. And it's a good idea to be monitoring what's going out. So that might be the chair's role while they're participating in the meeting. So the host PC opens the meeting, and if you're using a webcam video, in this case, we've actually got Helen who's sat upstairs in the same building. She's opening and shutting the meeting from upstairs. She's not actually in the room we're in. So she's effectively remotely hosting this. She isn't here to do the technology stuff. So we kind of shuffle things around it. Jeff's actually keeping an eye on the questions and things like that here. But the roles are key. So we've got these concepts of the different roles. And you might, if it's a big deal, might want to use headphones if you're running the PC, because then you can hear what's going on without needing it back into microphones. And ideally, you've got webcams that you can switch around between. Audio, you probably want something like 2-channel wireless microphones set up. Preferably using a frequency band where you're not going to need an Ofcom license, but it depends on the purpose you're using it for. You need to understand the Ofcom licensing, which I don't. They have commercial ones, not for profit ones, and so on and so on and so on. And there are different frequency bands which are free to use, and so on, etc. But basically, you want a wireless lapel microphone. I think it's kind of minimum. You probably want a USB mixer. You want to sort out things in advance and get everything tested and set up, and then have the person hosting the meeting controlling things like the audio levels during the talk to make sure there isn't too much interference going on. And then webcam stuff. Single webcam is by far the most simple solution. And if you're going to start using multiple ones, then you're going to want to be using something like the open broadcast software or possibly a video switcher to cut between the different cameras and show different views. Or you might choose that one of the laptops is running a webcam pointing at the speaker, and the other laptop is running the webcam pointing at you. There are different ways you can set it up. So think about what's going to work for your environment. Your speaker's point of view, it's really nice to have wireless microphones, really nice to have the handheld slide controller. You know, ideally you want a setup where the laptop screen is facing the speaker, so you don't keep turning around and looking at things all the time. Ideally you want a wall clock that's visible, and ideally you have the host or the chair monitoring the online chat and so on, by voice. That's a sort of summary of most of the common things that can happen. So, another fun thing is, stuff getting updated and things changing the next time you go to use it. It's subtly different because the version of the software you're using has been updated. They might have added some features or changed something. So, checking stuff on a regular basis is good. If you're going to do hybrid meetings, which can be a great thing, please don't underestimate the need for knowledge about this stuff, which is why the idea of doing this kind of a talk came about anyway, is to try to help people understand more about what's involved without trying to be prescriptive about what to do. Trying to help people understand things and they can perhaps make better decisions about the environments they're working in. Don't be reliant on too few people. That's another big problem area, I think. For goodness sake, don't underestimate how much time and effort is needed to set up and test and check things ahead of time. You know, this talk started at 7. Yeah, we started at 7. I actually got here 2 hours beforehand, and quite a lot of that time got used in making sure that everything worked well in advance and was tested and ready to go. Hopefully, it's been a relatively problem-free experience. It was certainly the intention. I kind of like using this slide. I've used it a lot in other talks as well. Pick 2, it's not going to be the other. You know, if it's going to be fast and good, it's probably not going to be cheap. If it's going to be good and cheap, it's probably not going to be fast. And you get the idea, right? I find it a useful way of getting people to think about it. And you want to be aiming, a sensible balance in there and in whichever direction is appropriate for what you're trying to do. Whatever you do, however you do it, and I really hope it goes well, please document this, how you set everything up, make life easy for other people. It's, you're reliant, particularly if it's a volunteer organisation, you're reliant on people. Have crib sheets, follow them, brief people in advance, allow plenty of time, keep it as simple as you can, and share the knowledge as much as you can to make life as easy as possible for everybody. So hopefully that's been helpful and useful. So thank you all for listening.
Questions?
Please.
Chris asked a question about the small mixer, which actually Paul Stone answered by giving him an example of a Yamaha machine. But the supplementary to which Chris was happy with and was going away to do some homework. But he also asked, do you know where you can get second-hand equipment like this? The inference being cheap.
That's a really sensible question, and the honest answer is I don't know. I guess you could try things like eBay. I mean, they're not. I think they're sufficiently cheap, as in, 150, 200 quid-ish, that I'd be surprised if you found many lying around second hand. I suspect, I fear that a lot of them might just end up being dumped. And the other thing is they will probably, some of the software and firmware, they'll go out of date and unsupported and things like that. Yeah, I'd probably start by looking at things like eBay, but beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, you could always ask.
Maplins do something. Maplins,
Maplin, do they still exist?
I don't know.
Well,
Online,
they're
online.
online.
Yeah, they're online.
Yeah.
They're online only. Yeah, I don't know whether they do second-hand stuff.
Unless I can't go to cheap fixes or maybe cheap fixes.
Yeah, and there are, and the other thing is, there's an awful lot of bands out there and an awful lot of shops selling, particularly, of late, music shops selling, amplification equipment, mixers, all sorts of things. And people do buy new gear and trade in their old gear. So it might be worth looking around some of the music shops selling equipment for bands. That could be worth a look.
Chris asked the question, will we get the slide pack or a recording? I think, seeing it's Christmas, we'll make both available.
How generous. Yes.
Which will be on our part, eventually will appear on the Wiltshire Branch part of the BCS website.
Yeah, I'll probably put the slide set up on what was my company website as well. So there's a URL at the bottom, xdelta.co.uk. There's a bunch of other talks up there. This slide set will probably join it.
Paul asks, have you got any experience of using mobile data instead of Wi-Fi, particularly 4G and 5G, which tend to be synchronous and high speed?
Yes, the only experience I've had is in a couple of venues, and it wasn't as successful as you'd like, because every so often something, if the tower got congested, the nearest mast, you could suddenly get hit with trouble. So the only experience I've got has not been trouble-free, but I never really found out why, because the venue didn't have much knowledge technically, other than they bought a service from whoever their 5G provider was. Certainly, if I were taking equipment somewhere to do something as a very portable system, I look hard at the availability of 4 and 5G bandwidth in the destination. And the other thing is, if you've got the stuff inside a building, it might not work anywhere near as well as if you can put it outside the building, or at least put it next to a window or something. But no, the only experience I've got hasn't been trouble-free, sadly.
Are there any further questions from the online participants, or indeed people in the room?
Yeah, so I've got a question. It's probably more around the software. Firstly, are there, what are the better software options to be able to show both, remote participants as well as the slide deck, and that sort of links to webinar type meetings. Is by definition, if it's a webinar, is that usually entirely online?
My experience of webinars is that they're entirely online, and that's what things like GoToWebinar as a piece of software, for example, is aimed at. So, and it's not as the webinar is largely unidirectional, unlike a meeting, which tends to be bidirectional, multi-directional. So if you were trying to do something like this, so let's postulate that you had 2 or 3 venues, each of which had several people in it. You're now getting closer to what used to be corporate video conferencing. And that starts to really push the cost up. I mean, you could use what this room has got. You know, this room has got. Let me point the camera at it. Yeah, it's got a pretty sophisticated. It's got a very sophisticated camera and microphone arrangement under the screen, and you can put things like that at both ends if you can afford to buy it.
I think this is something that a lot of companies are starting now to move to, is they might have a couple of locations with a meeting room, a small meeting room perhaps in each location, with 3 or 4 people at 3 or 4 people at one location, maybe 8 or 9 at another, and another half dozen people remotely.
Yes.
And what I've come across really is that's where the certainly for company, SMEs, that's where the technology is not quite there. You're having to compromise on being able to see people or be able to hear people. And I think that's the area that would be interesting to see the technology developments. So Microsoft Teams now, they recently introduced the pop-out feature, so you can at least see your slides on one and your participants on the other, but they've been lagging quite a lot in that. But I do think for small companies, this kind of 2 small meeting rooms plus a handful of people online is going to be a model that people will be trying to move to.
Yeah, I agree. It is, and that's kind of what this room is built for doing. But it's not yet available for a few £100.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking at, instead of having, a webcam, a couple of microphones and a mixer and a laptop, you're looking at having, stuff like, the more high-end stuff from companies like Jabra and Polycom and the others, and putting those kinds of equipment into, what's the buzzword that people use now? Huddle rooms, I think. Yeah, you're putting stuff like that into a couple of rooms. I've used it, it's very effective, but it's several £1,000 to buy.
And you've also got the problem that you invest in whichever technology, which is a few £1,000, and you happen not to get the one that goes ahead as mainstream, and you've ended up like the Polycom, the Polycom speakerphones that were useful for a period, and now are just redundant bits of hardware sitting under the conference room table. So I think a lot of people also feel concerned that if they shell out a load of money on fancy stuff, there's also the risk it will be just redundant in a couple of years.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same thing with buying pretty much anything, buying cell phones, buying cameras, buying pretty much anything. The moment you've bought it, it's going out of date. But if it's something that you need to use, I'm afraid it's a bit like buying, desktop PCs and things. It's something that you're going to invest quite a chunk of money in, not use a huge amount, or maybe slightly more than you thought, and its shelf life is probably not that long.
Paul's made a point on this, saying that it can be done if you have 2 screens in the venue with slides on one and participant view on the other.
Yep.
That, of course, needs a PC, not a laptop, unless that supports 3 screens.
Yep, that's also true. Yeah, so you can get creative and build ways of doing this.
He also says it wasn't that long ago we were using Skype and then Teams took over. Before that, it was Boy Scouts running with notes in cleft sticks.
Yeah. A couple of tin cans and a piece of string. Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Yes, it's a rapidly developing market.
If there are no more questions, I'm going to leap from the PC screen across the room. So folks online, you've got about 5 seconds to ask a question. Otherwise, I won't be able to see it. 4, 3, 2, One. I won't be late.
So yeah, well, hopefully people have found that interesting and it's a useful discussion as well. And thank you.
Colin, no, don't go away, don't go away. As always, it's been very stimulating, a great pleasure having you come down from Bristol to speak to us. As I say, this will come as no surprise. What's in the envelope? Hopefully we're on screen.
Well, thank you.
And thank you again. And I've got one last point before we give you a well-deserved round of applause. I can't look at the screen to see if people are clapping online, but thank you very much. One interesting thing monitoring what's been going on was looking at the closed captioning, and I'll leave you with this thought that the closed captioning software interpreted Ofcom as awful. So perhaps
Somebody somewhere knows something.
exactly. Anyway, Colin, thank you very much. Thank you for people who've attended in person, and thank you to everybody who attended online. Hopefully, we'll see you at our next meeting.